last couple of days, I've been thinking about adding to late news from Gomorrah. I haven't added anything for a long time, and so I was this morning. I thought, I'm gonna get up and and see if I can just add the poem to it somewhere here. Well, that's how you do it. You just have to write down and see what you come up with. If you wait for inspiration, you never get done.
Right.
Just start out and put something down. So then when I got the place where I was last added on, it was on the line which is the end of the world. And so I'm going to read this very short. The end of the world is not yet firmly booked, it seems. That though there are those whose knees and toenails might argue, curiously, that Armageddon has been called upon specifically to swiftly bring an end to some disfavored social structure that does not select for the author's desk.
Okay. What was that last line? The author's desk does not what? Author's desk?
Curiously, that Armageddon has not been called upon specifically to swiftly bring an end to some disfavored social structure that does not select for the author's desk. The author's desk is selected out of it, and it does not get destroyed in Armageddon. It's always happening to somebody else, not to them. That's it.
Yeah. I'm going to send you a listing that looks like this of all of the news sources that I can think of, and I want you to add more that you use. And on each one, I'd like for you to tell me what's a news source that you see every day? Is there something that you look at every day?
Every day? No, it's YouTube. So Kim Iverson would be one.
So if Kim Iverson is someone you see every day, then I would put a 5 there, which would be daily. Okay. And anything else that you see daily, I'd like to list those. And then add any other news sources that you have to this list. I want to begin to compile a database of everyone I know. I'm going to be asking the same question to. What do you view every day? And if they want to take the time, I realize going through each of these and saying whether you see them occasionally, never, et cetera, might be too much to ask of someone. But the first thing I'd like to do is say, what are the news sources that you see every day? So I did this for myself, and I got, I moved them over here so I wouldn't prejudice you in your listing, but I listed all of these with, what I see occasionally, what I never see, et cetera. So
now, are you going there's another? I totally love it. I love it. In my mind, there's a distinction between what I go looking for and what I see. Is that a distinction without a difference? Is that a question?
If you see it and you haven't gone to look for it, I would want it listed. And if this is the first time, I would put perhaps seldom or occasionally as your response.
Okay. I'm gonna interpret this as go-to, like these are the ones that I'm paying attention to if they come across my eyes, whether I look for them or not. But this is more of, you're trying to get towards, when you have a question, what's your trusted news source? As opposed to we're monitoring the internet to see what's being censored.
But I mentioned this to Paul before. The best thing to have would be every single thing that you look at, every news story you look at, everybody you read. However, that's pretty difficult to get a hold of. But the irony is somebody's already getting a hold of that. Somebody monitoring your internet usage, and they know exactly what you've seen. When you're viewing television, they know exactly what channel you're tuned into. Now, up to this point, they can't verify that you're actually paying attention, but they can say that you put it on your screen. So the whole idea, and this occurred to me while I was watching the Social Dilemma, and they're talking about the fact that all of the people in involved in any kind of broadcasting or internet blog or website, their goal is to get your eyes on that screen.
Yeah.
That's what they want to do. So one of the things that I hope this might lead to, and I don't know how many people will be inclined to cooperate with this or not, but as I do it, I think one of the benefits is that if I could get them to list this, so let's say I met someone for the first time and I said, do this, and they listed their news sources, I'd have a pretty good idea of what things we shared in common. You know, I have a pretty good idea what topics I may agree with them about and what I don't. I mean, if I see somebody watches Rachel Maddow every day without fail, and another person listens to Steve Bannon every day without fail, I can get a pretty clear idea of who I'm dealing with. I mean, that's prejudicial, obviously, but it's a clue. So I'm hoping that would then, the ultimate goal would be, as I was telling Paul, you are what you eat. So if your diet of information follows a certain pattern, you're going to end up a certain way. Just like if you eat nothing but sugar and starch, you're going to end up in a certain shape. So I don't know how effective this will be, but I wanted to throw this at you guys to see what you think about it.
No, I love it. And I can, I'm sure you could do this. I can do this as well, of create a form to make that easy. Yeah, I would like to, I do love it. I would like to look at the frequency label categories. Yeah, let's take a look at that.
Well, I'll send this to you.
Because it's nuanced, because it's what am I trying to say? That like where you go to and what subjects you're looking for. Like, I have seen Tucker Carlson. I'm not going to Tucker Carlson, but he pops up sometimes through other channels. And I do watch it, but I'm not, how do you realize that I am not a Tucker Carlson viewer, but I have seen him more often than someone who watches Rachel Maddow every day?
Well, you would say that you occasionally watch Tucker Carlson.
Okay,
or
and
perhaps seldom. But,
and that includes the clips of Tulsi Gabbard on Tucker
the secondhand.
Okay, includes that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is by no means perfect, and if you can tweak it to make it a little more.
I think just in the explanation of like, this is just a general, like, yeah, it's like, don't.
Right. Well,
this is not a how do you label yourself question.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, my goal would be to avoid the binary nature of most people's analysis of the news. You're either left or you're right. Well, if I'm watching Fox News, as I do frequently, not every day, but frequently, then I understand some things that I wouldn't understand if I didn't watch what they were saying or listen to what they're saying. So hopefully it would move people to say, well, I never see this, so how can I pass judgment on it without ever having seen it?
Right.
And conversely, people on the right, are you listening to are you watching MSNBC? Are you even seeing NPR or PBS?
Right.
Yeah.
The unclear thing that, if you want to mull over, is that indirect seeing, like how to phrase that and how to incorporate that and think about that, of like, if I'm watching someone critique MSNBC on another channel, is that watching MSNBC? So I don't know the answer to that question, but think about it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like I said, the ideal would be to record every single thought you had about what you did, but
well, I don't want to take it that far, but that I just bring it up because it is a constant in my news diet.
Yeah.
of people evaluating other people's news.
Mhm. Well, it's kind of like the reporting on Trump. While I made my mind up about Trump a long time ago, long before he ever began to run for president, I knew what I knew what he was.
Yeah, likewise.
But
I watched wrestling.
I have to say, most of the time, I don't get the unfiltered Trump.
Oh,
I don't follow his Twitter feed, so I don't, I don't know. I hear, someone say this is what the president said, and they'll list part of a tweet, but I don't get the whole thing. So every other tweet he made could have been, "I love Nancy Pelosi," and I don't know because I haven't seen it firsthand. So
I think this would be interesting because there's two lanes. Just in anytime you ask this type of survey, there is the what are you actually doing and what do you think you're doing. Mm-hmm. The what do you think you're doing goes into, okay, if I were to ask you, like, here is a topic, where would you go first? So that's what you think you're doing, mm-hmm. versus list out all the things and then oh wow, I didn't notice. I watch way more indirect Tucker Carlson than I realized. Mm-hmm. Like that's the second. Yeah. So interesting.
Well, I'd love to get to that point, but
survey science is one all made up, but fantastically wonderful.
Yeah. It seems to me that given the internet we have now, that basically there ought to be some readily available apps that will do that for you already.
How so?
Oh, well, that's what they do, right? Is that they, you go somewhere and some little app goes and puts in there.
To record
all that data, which, it's to have somebody sit and plug it all in there. When you've got software, it'll just do it. I don't know that I know where you could find it, but I bet you we're looking for it. We'd find some variation of it pretty rapidly. So, track all my where I go, basically.
Yeah, well, Google does that automatically.
Yeah,
if you're doing searches
and that's where you get the stuff about what people actually go and watch rather than what they think they watch.
Right.
Because
if you ask them what they think they're watching, porn ranks way down on the list.
Yeah, but it's really up there.
It actually is much higher on there.
Yeah, true. And it's especially heavy in the South.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've already checked that out. Yep, that's where most porn is accessed.
I know the answer to all of those questions. Just do the news naked.
No.
England already figured it out. So
I don't think Rush Limbaugh would have an audience.
Yeah, no. Get that out of my mind. But
the revolution died today. Oh.
Well, I brought up the subject of the social dilemma. Have you seen that, Dustin?
I have not.
I'm
aware of it, though.
I would appreciate it. It's on Netflix. I would appreciate it if you would, because there's a lot of content in there that I don't want to repeat. But it's to this point about the fact that we've arrived at a great divide in our politics, not because people designing the systems intended it, but because that was an unforeseen consequence, or at least an acceptable consequence of what they did. I mean, for instance, with Facebook, the intention, I'm sure, that Zuckerberg had was to make money, first of all, but to give people a method to connect with each other. And that's a very noble thing to do. You get to see your friends from out of town and your grandchildren, et cetera.
So what he really was trying to do was to find good-looking women in the college he was at.
Yeah, well, that's the Harvard approach to it. Yeah, the Facebook.
Everybody get on and judge it for it, and then he'd know.
Right.
Right.
But the unintended consequences were what Cambridge Analytica did, which was capture all of that information and then tailor directed advertising at specific groups. Now, to do it for advertising, you know, if I think I may have mentioned to you before, we just got a cat, and I went to the grocery store and I bought cat food. It's the first time I bought cat food in God knows how long. I don't know, 30 years. The next day I had 3 cat food ads on my feed on Facebook.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So they're doing it to us all the time.
Yeah.
And some people see that as a positive thing. You know, well, I'm shopping for cat food. Let me see what the different varieties are. And they're doing that all for me. Other people like me see it as an intrusion. What? I don't want you to know I have a cat. I don't want you to know where I shop, you know, but I was dumb enough to sign up for a Kroger card to get their little discount, and they've got my name. And when I put the Kroger card in, that data is out. And Facebook apparently Kroger is selling the data to Facebook, or or to someone, they're selling it to the cat food vendors who are then, processing it to Facebook. But my data is being used against me and or for me, depending on which way you look at it. So that's kind of I mentioned the social dilemma. That's kind of the route that I want to look at is how can we collect data about ourselves that we can use, and how can we make people aware of the fact that other people are using your data to influence you? Yeah. So
I would love to see kind of like the Icebox challenge, right? So it's the how to get an ad challenge. The same thing of like, if I went out and bought dog food, I've never owned a dog.
mm-hmm.
And just to kind of record what happens in the next 48 hours,
Mm-hmm.
just that kind of challenge. That kind of thing. I know it sounds silly, but it is very viral, because we'd all watch that train wreck. Because I think we all understand that it is impacting us, even if we won't go and contemplate the severity of that impact.
Yeah. No. I had considered creating an alternate identity.
You should have two. You should have two. I've been kicking myself. I need a work account, a social, like a friends, family account, and a third account.
Well, I would like to portray myself as a far right-wing militiaman.
That too.
I could see how that came to me, and so I've quit seeing that stuff. During the 2016 election, I saw lots of stuff coming through, lots of right-wing crap. I don't see it much anymore. They filtered it out for me because they know I don't respond to it. So I don't get it anymore. So it's one of the things that, in addition to each of us kind of separating ourselves, the media moguls are separating us for each, we're profiling us and putting us in the places they want us to be in. So that I'm not seeing the ads to come to the Capitol and get into the riot. And they're there, to your point, secondary news will show me that they're there, but I don't see them myself. So I don't know. Are you seeing any of those, Paul? Are you?
No, I don't. I'm intolerant of those things.
But have you seen a fall of those? Have you seen the number of right-wing ads go down on social media you are involved with?
One of the places I'm mostly likely to see that is on Twitter.
Yeah,
where I can see stuff. And there's, that's dropped off considerably, although there's still some out there. It's really dropped off a lot, which is okay.
I haven't stopped to notice, but now I might. Now, an interesting thing that just popped up right now is we have 3 different method people here. I believe, Michael, you watch more Facebook of this, and then Paul, you do more Twitter, and I do more YouTube. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. We've got something there. We can do some cross monitoring.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
I
was going to say, to your point about there being apps out there already that do some of this for us, I wish that there were a forum where we could have news people. And I'm looking at broadcast news now, so I'd like to have um, Laura Ingraham and Rachel Maddow on a show together.
Mhm.
So the moderator could give them a topic and they could state their view, and he or she could challenge them on the facts of what they're saying. And that's where we're missing it. The real debate is not going on between politicians. It's going on between networks.
Yeah.
Right.
They set the agenda, they ask the questions, the politicians respond. I mean, a politician who just got elected doesn't want to say anything. So when you trap them and you make them say something, they're only going to say the things that they think their voters want to hear. But the news people should be a little more free, since what they're competing for is your eyes on the screen. Well, if there were a common platform, and each week we could have a discussion. Now, the one that Crystal Ball does, I've forgotten what that's called now.
Rising.
Paul, is that something you're familiar with?
I've seen it, but I don't think I've read much of it.
They are attempting that. I mean, he's a Republican. She's left, he's right. I don't know what their political affiliation is, but they've had a chance to bring up different subjects. What I find is they don't disagree enough.
Right.
They begin by saying, well, we're going to find the things we can agree about. But, I would love to have an opportunity to have those folks come together. So because I can't make that happen, I'd like to find more people who could represent that. So people who do make the predominant diet, coming from the right, I'd like to invite them into this forum or something like this to have a discussion. I don't want a shouting match. I just want a truth-seeking kind of.
That would be interesting. I think there is actually, it's a lot more accessible on the YouTube front. I've seen it kind of happen. There's, of course, Rising is a YouTube show.
Right.
And then there's another one called Hill of Roses, where they try to do exactly what we're doing. And it was a lot easier in elections because you can have people over candidates. It was easier to find the normal people. And they would have 4 different things. Like they'd have the Republican, they'd have the conservative, the liberal, the Bernie, and the moderator or something, like one of those things. Like they found what it was. And also in YouTube, there's a thing called super chats. Now, this is a dangerous thing I'm finding, but let's not throw it entirely out. Where the super chat is, you can pay $5 to get your comment like highlighted, and usually that person is reading it. Now, I've had to stop myself because it is a parasocial thing where, like, I want to screen my thing above the rabble, so I'm going to pay to do it. And it's this, and I started noticing my emotions during this thing, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm falling down a roll where I'm just going to be giving these people money.
Yep. Yeah.
And so there's the danger there, but there's also the opportunity there of, well, they interact with that. So there is on the YouTube side, one, slowly people trying to do what we're doing, but then also you do have an interaction with these people. Like, I can't interact with Rachel Maddow. I don't know a way of doing that. Even if I pay, like, I would have to pay a significant amount of money to interact with Rachel Maddow. I can't pay $5 to interact with Rachel Maddow. No. But somebody
really clever to say.
yeah, something, yeah. So there's opportunity and danger there. So,
well, they can. I mean, they basically can do that now. On just do it on on a Zoom platform. So you can earn and talk to Rachel for a certain amount of money. You can get in there, and that would be lots of fun to listen to her talk and then interact with her somewhat. That
would be great. Now, I know on a fundraising side, if we got the Kiwanis Club of Louisville or whatever to buy an hour, and so you have 1,000 people giving $5, she may interact with your representative for $5,000. Now, as I say that out loud, I'm like, oh, corporate people might even be easier to buy time with than politicians.
Well, one of the things I was talking about of getting people to state their sources as before I really got to know them, so I kind of get a rough profile of where they were left to right before we began a relationship of any type. The other part of that is I'd like to see response to events without the media commentators spinning it for me. It's the C-SPAN approach. Show me the actual thing. Don't let somebody talk and then have some talking head come on and tell me what they said. I found it interesting the other day, or on the 6th, when we had the insurrection, that I watched that live. Did either of you see that live? I was watching and listening to the speeches on the floor when they broke away to show the crowds. They were showing, the speeches on the floor. They were showing Trump's speech. They didn't show much of Giuliani or Junior doing their thing, but as soon as the crowd started to move, they went outside. So I was watching the event as it occurred. Well, I flipped to Fox right away. The response was entirely negative. Oh my God, what the hell is going on? This is horrible. This is terrible. I think throughout the country, anybody who was watching it live, regardless of your politics, I mean, with very few exceptions, maybe the family of the people who were actually there, but probably 90% plus of the population said, this is horrible. The next day, I hear the divisions start, where we start to spin the story about, well, now the Black Lives Matter people rioted too, and you didn't come, it just starts, how do we separate this common event into our two respective camps and spin it the way we want? So one of the things I'd like to see is when something happens, like let's say there is trouble on Inauguration Day, I'd like to hear immediate response from selected individuals before the spinning starts. Let's get impressions, see how this is coming to us. I think we have a whole lot more in common. When I saw the Black Lives Matter riots, I was just as repelled as I was, well, maybe not as much because of the setting they were in, but the idea of people, burning buildings and throwing things at each other and even shooting at each other is repellent to me, no matter who's doing it for what reason. But when we start to spin it, it's, well, our rioters were not as bad as your rioters, then it breaks that commonality.
Now, I love that idea. There's a technical problem, though, I was coming across of finding the live version without spin.
Yeah.
Now, this is with the videos because, maybe there are video cameras everywhere in the Capitol. They just don't release it. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But of the videos being released, there was already spin. Now, unfortunately, and I have, I try to find and keep tabs on true investigative journalists. There's very few of them. And there were two of them. No, there's one of them and then two other just individuals. And all three were releasing videos. And the investigative journalism, which I trust so far, was giving one perspective, but the others who were just their camera, it was live, I'd turn off their volume and just watch their pictures, was giving me a different perspective. So the one of them was showing just violence, and the other one was showing not violence. And it was like, but these were all footages of the same thing, just 100 yards away.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that? So first, like it's again back to your trusted sources. Like if Aaron Mate or Jordan Peterson, not Jordan Peterson, the status quo guy, I've seen their investigative, like find an investigative reporter, find an ally, and make that part of your media diet. Is my advice, but
yeah.
And the corporate media don't have investigative reporters, so sorry.
No, gone.
Do they actually? That's a good question. So I don't watch that news. Does MSNBC, CNN, or Fox have an investigative reporter that you know of?
Well, they have several who would identify themselves as investigative reporters.
But that you would
Uh,
classify them as.
Well, it's hard to see the boundaries there, but
For me.
if you had someone from the New York Times who was reporting on, the story about the fundraising that was done prior to the insurrection, that there were people who even during the insurrection were tweeting out, send us money.
Right.
Well, I think you would classify that as investigative because it was not something that was readily obvious. They had to go somewhere to uncover the evidence. So it's different from you know, you have to dig a little deeper. So I think there are quite a few that I would classify as investigative. But to your point, I don't know that it's Watergate type investigation. I don't think it's that in depth. I think they do again, the news cycle is so short that there's not time enough for that. You have to.
Well, I also divide between pundits, analysts, and investigators, and it's about how far removed are they from the source. So if you're just looking online, you're an analyst.
Yeah.
If you're uncovering something that's not online, basically, and that's a loose definition, but if you're uncovering the information, that's investigation. If you're analyzing other people's uncoverings, that's analyst. And if you're just stating your opinion, which is valid, like pundits are okay, like we're punditing right now.
Right.
You're a pundit. So that's how I kind of do it. So you can have at the New York, like some of these people do submit articles to the New York Times. So again, you have to know their names. I think you have to know their names
and when they're likely to show up as a live feed someplace.
Yeah,
that's what's happening. You'll be watching them and be like, "Oh, here's so and so, and he's live from." Oh,
no.
Okay, we didn't know that was happening until just now. Mostly they don't do that because they want to make sure that they modify their. They can get some profit out of it and also control what goes out.
Yeah. Much of it is determined by the form in which their product is, marketed.
Yeah.
So if you're on the New York Times staff, you may do a story that is not going to be printed for several weeks. But if you're with, CNN, if it's yesterday's news, it doesn't show up. So if you know that you have to have something out there now, you don't look as deeply as you might if you were writing a book about it.
Yep.
I'd like to kind of dive into a related question of how do you feel about and how do you determine the profit motives of all these people? And I'll give you an example I'm thinking of. There was I didn't really watch, there's another YouTube thing called TYT, the Young Turks, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't really watch most of them. They're a bit too yelly for me.
I haven't seen them recently. I don't know.
Yeah, but then they got so they were saying they got on my radar because they were hovering around the things that catch my ear. And then they got, $20-40 million from somebody and they became they started sounding very MSNBC.
Yeah.
How do you, but then I also have, and I want to call him Jordan Peterson. I want to make sure it's not the right-wing guy. It's the status quo guy. And, he's disclosed his finances. He's not taking corporate money, but he also has to make a living. He has to pay for his trips to DC to do the investigation. How do each of you recognize their funding source? How important is that? How does that play into it and tie it back to the chart you're developing?
The funding sources. In some cases, I don't know that I can determine those. I mean, I could look at the commercials that are running, which may not.
Well, keep it general. If I'm watching MSNBC, I know they're corporate funding sources and they're biased, and I hate them.
Right.
So keep it general.
Well, you might find the My Pillow guy advertising on MSNBC. So just because they're being funded by the guy, that it doesn't mean that his agenda is necessarily, affecting what they're doing. I'm always taken when I watch the evening news by the fact that well over 90% of their advertising is about pharmaceuticals.
Right.
I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of, drugs of all sorts being advertised there. So
And advertise to old people.
yeah, well, that's because that's their audience. So
Right.
they're not going to advertise Lego blocks on the evening news because there's no audience for it. So that's an interesting point, and I just don't know how I would categorize it, other than who puts an ad on their website or who has a commercial on their
program. Well, let me ask you, Paul. Let me rephrase it. How do you determine in your own mind? Now, you don't have to, not right or wrong. This is just you. So there's no right or wrong.
Okay.
How do you determine intent from your sources that you put in your list, Paul?
Intent,
and I'm tying it back to money. Like in generalizing, if I see corporate news, I have a bias that your intent is to make money, not make my life better. So I avoid, or I criticize corporate news in that manner. Now, I am generalizing the hell. I'm not right or wrong. I'm not saying that. It's just what my heart does.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I hardly feel like that I can count on the corporate news for anything really seriously, whatever it might be. I mean, they're gonna say what they need to say in order to make money. Period. That's the end of that discussion. And there's no, we don't need to chase it around anymore than that. That's what they do. What's more interesting are to find the people that work for the various corporations who occasionally get out and have their own they might have their own Twitter feed, or they write articles that show up out there in the world that are not necessarily perfectly in line with what the people that hires them are doing. I mean, they're not, you stuff on there and then it's like, oh, well, but Rachel Maddow, Rachel's very much inclined to say what she thinks, period, in the discussion. If it doesn't agree with MSNBC, well, that's too bad, because she's got clout, because she draws such a good audience. And so she's going to be saying things that, other people on that network wouldn't get away with. So,
yeah, I think that's how people like Sean Hannity made it, because even though he's I don't think a great commentator or analyst or whatever the hell he is, but he had a following. And when he got Trump as a following, made his career. The guy's a gazillionaire now, and he can do what he wants because he knows he's bigger than Fox Network. They need him.
Or he was up until just recently.
Well, they need him more than he needs them. He might go to the new Trump network when Trump starts his own network.
Yeah.
Now that leads me to the notion of legitimacy. Now, this was a big thing before the world ended, that like, is Fox News a legitimate news outlet? And a lot of people who don't like Fox would scoff at that. And they're like, well, a legitimate news outlet means you have to follow the scientific method or something. It's like, no. Legitimate just means you got a critical mass of people to force your way into the conversation. Just like we're saying of like Rachel Maddow, she's got just the size of her audience is more important than anything else, even though she has good, there's good stuff there, but it's the critical part is the size of audience.
Yeah.
So the legitimacy is, we understand, we can get into conversations of legitimacy, and we kind of veer away in general, the populace. I want them to go through those conversations of legitimacy and really understand that word, and then replace that word with popularity. And then compare the world to high school, because it's what it seems like to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, when this whole stuff really began going and that question popped up, what's legitimate news? Of course, I think of the people that, these are the people that agree to report both sides of the story, and they go through the whole thing. That it was, the Dan Rather approach, or the Walter Cronkite approach. You got this. They're going to tell you what they think is there, and pretty straightforward about it. And they were not they're not spending it to except in the broad case of doing, American news. So that for me was where the legitimacy ran out when they started.
Well,
Everybody, started getting on the corporate stuff because, of course, then they began to spend. Well, that was what was the legislation that they allowed them to do that. They got rid of the necessity.
Oh, the Telecommunications
equal
Act?
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the Rupert Murdoch special, that's what that was, just for him.
Well,
Hey,
I
I
like
get
that
to
name.
decide what goes up, that, and so, yeah, he, oh God, Rupert. That was really when the dive really went steep and the stuff began to come out, you talk to Carlson and what's his name, Fat Ass. And so yeah, now that's why we have to go through a lot of this thing, because and I think when I was in school, if I turned on the news and Walter Cronkite said something, I didn't have any reason whatsoever to believe it wasn't true. Sure it is. And if it wasn't, later on, he'd come back and say so.
Right.
We found out this wasn't the case, and that was what they, and that was the standards for news. That's the the integrity there. That is.
And I don't know when this in history this happened, but this is why I keep coming back to it's the profit motive. And I see the profit motive in your social media. Like if you can imagine Facebook without a profit motive, how would fake news disseminate? It would disseminate, but differently. If you didn't have a profit motive, like in the nightly news, and what Good Night, Good Luck was a great movie. I love that. It's like, before, I don't know when it changed, and maybe you all do, it's like we have a corporation, but then we have a news department. And it has nothing to do with your corporation. It only has legitimacy if we are fair and balanced, right? Yeah. And then it changed to, no, we can make money off this.
Well, originally, speaking of television more than any other media, I guess it was Newton Minow who set up the rules that if you were going to have a broadcast license, that you had to spend a certain percentage of your broadcast time on what they would have called public interest, which included the news service. And the news didn't have advertising. It was something that the network did as an obligation to the government to provide a platform for information. So it wasn't just all howdy doody and I love Lucy. It was a requirement that they do it. And with the new Telecommunications Act, the requirement disappeared. Maybe it was outdated, but
now you can give your opinion and say it's news, or like you can have 20% news and then all opinion. Like,
well, the interesting thing for me comes in. I was listening to Meet the Press this morning, and when you hear Chuck Todd speak, and I'm not a real big fan of his, but he begins his program oftentimes by saying, well, Donald Trump is lying again, or something along those lines. Now, from my perspective, that's true. I hear Donald Trump speak, he's lying. If he opens his mouth, he's lying. But what's the responsibility of someone in Chuck Todd's position to speak what he thinks is the truth, and to give a balanced view of what the various constituents in the audience might think is the truth? In other words, if you are broadcasting to a lot of people who believe the moon is made of green cheese, do you have to give any credence to that? Do you have to say, well, some people don't think that, this happened? There's the idea that if I'm speaking the truth, I have to believe what I'm saying. I have to believe it. That maybe I'm wrong, but I have to believe what I'm saying is true. Otherwise, I am a liar. That I even if I speak the truth, if I think I'm lying, I'm a liar. So there's a complex kind of thing here. If Rush Limbaugh thinks he is speaking the truth, then what's wrong with that?
I like the when you were talking about there's the both sides thing that I think we're all kind of getting to this point of there's not just two sides, and typically they're not equal. You've got don't bomb this and I'm a Nazi. Well, one of those is illegitimate.
Yeah.
There's that, but there's also on that news, just like going back to the Cronkite era of, I don't want you to speak to an audience. I want you to speak to all the audiences.
Yeah.
Like, this is the bubble trap of, and then when I was talking about super chats, this was really coming in real time of, okay, well, I see an audience. Well, I'm going to talk to you because I'm a human being and I've done some entertaining, and that's a real thing.
Yeah.
I want the news to have an identity. I want the news anchor and the news team to have an identity like the Cronkite era of, I'm going to speak to the entire America, even if they're not watching.
Even if you know they don't agree with you.
Even if, yeah, absolutely. I can report all sides. I don't have to rank them equally, but I'm not going to cater to one. I'm going to serve all.
Yeah.
Well, in serving others, if you believe that what they are accepting is wrong, or you serve, and for instance, right now, there are people in this country who believe that the election was stolen, that there was mass fraud going on throughout the country and the election was just stolen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that wasn't true.
I can still serve them.
Say that. Well, I have documentation. I have court hearings. I have election officials. I have this on my side. What does the other side have? Well, Trump says it's true.
Right.
So,
well, there's a different way I would serve them.
Well, but when you present it to them, you have to say, you can't. You have to be neutral, but you can't be neuter. You have to say what you believe to be true. You might say, not everybody accepts this, but is the vaccine safe? Yes, I believe it is safe. If people started dying from it, would I change my mind? Yeah. But there are places where it gets kind of tough to say. It's like someone asking you for a recommendation. Well,
it's not about having an answer. It's about your behavior. So my behavior would say, you're saying like with the election being stolen, it's like, okay, you're saying this, and here's how I can sympathize with you. I'm not going to say this well because I haven't prepared it, but one, I can sympathize with the downtrodden in any aspect, right? Mm-hmm. Two, I can say, okay, well, this person has been lying about things, so maybe you should not trust it immediately. But also, what I have never heard is, okay, I know this election wasn't stolen in the way these people are saying, but nobody else has told me how they are sure that any election isn't messed with. It's like, this was the idea of like, okay, I just assume this election is not stolen because everybody says it wasn't. You have to, what's wrong with every single election? We have things that we all have to look for.
Right.
Just because your team won doesn't mean you don't ask the question.
Right.
And then you says, okay, I acknowledge, you acknowledge them, you don't further that misconception because it's based off a lie. You argue your point, but you acknowledge them as human beings. Yeah. That's how you do it.
Well, this may be a topic to extend into another time, but the problem occurred in schools throughout my teaching career, particularly with people who are teaching history or social studies, that kind of thing. The teacher can't take a political position. So the teacher can't say this was, in the old days, you couldn't say that the South was completely wrong about the Civil War. You certainly couldn't say that in the South. So, you put someone in a position where they have to instruct other people. What are they supposed to do? Just say, well, here's two sides of the question and decide for yourself? Or do you express, here's the two sides. My opinion is this one is the correct one. You know, I think it is important to see both sides of any issue,
Sure.
but I don't think whether it's in a school or on the news, that the person should not be able to say, here's where I am. You know, and one of the things that getting back to the listing I was making before, is I'd love to have that list go out to, you know, more prominent people. You know, if you're Andy Brashear, where do you get your information each day?
That would be nice. Yeah.
You know, if you're, you know, whoever, if you're one of those pundits, where are you getting your information? So,
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting along that line. Oh, Michael, I ran across somebody the woman who started the 1619 movement. And, you know, and I thought about you because I was previously had some discussion with people about, you know, when does it matter? You know, when does were the white men? That's where it was. Stand up, wake up, white. I think that's what we were talking about. Frank Schwartz had this one along with Gary, and you know, and it's like everybody points out, and everybody points to white men as being where it began going really south, and I thought, no, it's not about really that. I thought about Michael Price. I said, it's really about the rich people, first and foremost,
right,
taking advantage of the not so rich people or the somewhat less rich people to maintain their status. And it just so happened that it was because they had lots of slaves. They were rich. They had a lot of slaves. That it began to be the slaves were the caste, as you had it, that was, you know, really being blamed for all this stuff. And so that happened to be black people because that's who was doing the hard work. And, you know, and I thought, I don't want to start that fight. They won't argue. I mean, they'll think, oh, well, no, of course not. It's all of the white people that did it. Well, white people did it at the direction of the rich people. How's that? Yeah.
The rich people wanted to do it to the Irish too.
They wanted to do it to the Irish. They did it